The letter was still warm from her hands when I found it on the kitchen table. Outside the window, the morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold, but inside my house, everything had turned cold. My wife had smiled at me only an hour earlier. She had made coffee, watered the flowers, and kissed my forehead before telling me she wanted to rest. I never imagined that would be the last time I would ever see her alive. When I opened the folded paper and saw my name written in her beautiful handwriting, my heart began to race. I didn't know that those few pages would change my life forever. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel, Lifeline Vibes. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you believe love can continue even after goodbye. My name is Rowan Mercer, and for 15 years my world revolved around my wife, Serafina. We lived in a small house at the edge of a quiet town surrounded by green hills and old maple trees. We were never rich. I worked as a mechanic, and Serafina taught music lessons to neighborhood children. We didn't have children of our own. Doctors had once told us that becoming parents would be nearly impossible. That news had broken our hearts years ago, but somehow, we learned to fill our lives with other kinds of love. Serafina had a way of making ordinary days feel magical. She planted flowers in old teacups, sang while making breakfast, and remembered every birthday in town. Everyone loved her because she carried kindness like sunlight. But 2 years before that morning, she became ill. At first, it was only headaches and exhaustion. Then came hospital visits, scans, and finally the terrible diagnosis. An aggressive disease was slowly taking her away from me. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, feeling as though the world had stopped spinning. She looked at me with those calm gray eyes and squeezed my hand. I promised I would never leave her side, and I didn't. I learned how to prepare her medicine, how to cook her favorite soup, and how to hide my tears whenever she smiled at me. I watched the strongest person I knew grow weaker every day, yet she never complained. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and find her staring at the moon through the bedroom window. She said she wasn't afraid of dying. She was only afraid of leaving me alone. On that bright spring morning after I found the letter, I rushed into our bedroom. She was lying peacefully, as if she had simply fallen asleep. I called her name. I shook her shoulders. I begged her to wake up, but she was gone. The funeral happened 3 days later. The entire town came. Children she had taught placed white flowers beside her photograph. Elderly neighbors cried openly. Even people who barely knew her stood silently because somehow she had touched every life she encountered. I stood there like a man turned to stone. I couldn't cry. I couldn't speak. I simply held the letter in my pocket. It took me another week before I had the courage to read it. I sat alone in our garden where she had planted yellow roses. The envelope trembled in my hands. Inside were several pages. She had written that she knew her time was ending. She had hidden her pain because she wanted our final days to be filled with love instead of fear. Then I reached the sentence that stole my breath. She had a final wish for me. 3 years earlier, during one of her music classes, she had met a little girl named Elira. Elira was 10 years old and had lost both parents in a car accident. Since then, she had been living in a state care home. According to the letter, Serafina had secretly been visiting the girl for nearly 2 years. She wrote that Elira reminded her of the daughter we never had. She believed the child needed a family. At the bottom of the page, my wife had written one final request. Please find Elira. If your heart allows it, give her the home we always dreamed of filling with laughter. I read the sentence over and over. I couldn't understand. I was drowning in grief. How could I take care of another person when I could barely take care of myself? I folded the letter and put it away. Days passed. The house became unbearably quiet. No music played in the kitchen. No flowers appeared on the windowsill. I stopped shaving. I barely ate. Every room carried memories of Serafina. Then one afternoon I noticed something strange. On the bookshelf was a small box I had never seen before. Inside were photographs. Photographs of Serafina and a little girl with curly black hair and bright eyes. They were planting flowers, baking cookies, drawing pictures. In every photo, my wife looked incredibly happy. There was also a note. If you're looking at these pictures, it means I am gone. Please meet her at least once, that is all I ask. I cried for the first time. I cried until sunset. The next morning, I drove to the care home. The building stood on a hill overlooking the town. I almost turned around, but then I remembered my wife's smile. I walked inside. A social worker led me to the garden. There, beneath a large oak tree, sat a little girl reading a book. She looked up at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled gently. She already knew who I was. Serafina had told her stories about me. The girl said my wife called me the kindest man in the world. Hearing those words shattered my heart all over again. I spent an hour with Elira that day. Then I returned the following week. And the week after that, she loved drawing and hated rainy days. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because she wanted to help injured animals. Slowly, I began looking forward to our meetings. For the first time since my wife's death, I had a reason to leave the house. One afternoon, Elira showed me a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes from Serafina. My wife had written encouraging messages for every important moment in the girl's life. For birthdays, for bad days, for moments when she felt lonely. I realized then that even while fighting her illness, my wife had spent her remaining strength making sure another child never felt abandoned. I drove home with tears streaming down my face. That night, I opened her letter again. This time I understood. Her final wish wasn't a burden. It was a gift. Months later, I completed the paperwork to become Elira's guardian. The day she moved into our house, she carried only 2 small bags and a stuffed rabbit. She stood in the doorway nervously. I felt nervous too. Neither of us knew how to become a family. But we were willing to try. The first weeks were awkward. I burned dinner. She accidentally broke one of my coffee mugs and cried because she thought I would send her away. I hugged her and promised that she belonged here. Gradually, laughter returned to the house. We planted flowers in the garden exactly the way Serafina used to. We baked cookies and made terrible messes in the kitchen. We spent evenings reading stories on the porch. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. One evening, while cleaning the attic, Elira found an old video camera. Inside was a recording made by my wife shortly before her death. We watched it together. Serafina appeared on the screen, smiling softly. She spoke about love and family. She said that grief was simply love with nowhere to go. Then she looked directly into the camera. She said she hoped that one day I would understand that my heart was still capable of giving and receiving joy. At the end of the video, she looked emotional. She said that if Elira was sitting beside me while watching, then her final wish had come true. Neither of us could stop crying. Years passed. Elira grew taller and wiser. She filled every corner of our home with life. She called me Dad for the first time on my birthday. I had to leave the room because I couldn't stop crying. On the anniversary of my wife's passing, we visited her grave carrying yellow roses. Elira placed a handwritten letter beside the stone. She thanked Serafina for loving her before they were officially family. She thanked her for giving her a father. I stood there looking at the sunset and realized something extraordinary. I no longer felt completely broken. The pain of losing my wife would never disappear. But alongside that pain existed something beautiful, hope, because love does not end when someone leaves this world. Sometimes it changes shape. Sometimes it becomes a memory, a lesson, or a new beginning. If this story is touching your heart right now, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps these stories reach people who may be struggling with loss and searching for light. And before we end, we have one special request. Please comment. Love never truly leaves. 5 years after Serafina's death, I stood in our garden watching Elira prepare for her school graduation. The yellow roses bloomed brighter than ever. The morning sunlight touched every flower. For a moment, I felt as if my wife were standing beside me again, not in sadness, not in grief, but in peace. I looked at the house, at the girl who had become my daughter, and at the life we had built together. Then I opened the old letter one final time. At the bottom, beneath everything else, was one sentence I had somehow missed all those years ago. It read, "When you think your heart has reached its end, love someone again and you will discover